Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Splash City Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Hartman, and today we're going to tackle a topic, a subject that I've wanted to talk about for a long time, but really haven't gotten to, and that is the issues that are happening in college basketball and the NBA. But the chaos we're seeing on the court at both college and the NBA level is super fun, makes for super exciting games, really engaging. But the bad part is there's chaos off the court. And right now we're watching the professionalization of the college game, transfer portal, no consistency, players leaving here, teams adding players midseason. It's just a real chaotic mess. We have private equity owning a stake in the Utah University athletics program. And there's G League players joining college teams mid-season. So it's just a lot of them. It's a lot of chaos right now. In the NBA, you've got the Jazz openly tanking. There's a half dozen teams who are basically out of it, irrelevant. Even teams with playoff aspirations are resting starters on the regular. We have some of the best players in the game who may not be eligible for postseason awards because they don't hit that threshold of number of games played throughout the season, and they're all doing it because they don't want to get hurt. They want to be ready for the playoffs, but it makes for a really long season of some really awkward games, some lethargic games where teams aren't as engaged. So I have some solutions for that, and I'll lay those out in today's episode. Also, in today's episode, at the end, we'll talk about my weekly college basketball top 10 rankings, and it's going to be a big change. We had 7 of the top 10 teams in college basketball lose over the last week. Duke goes down at Carolina. Arizona loses at Kansas. Iowa State loses at TCU. Illinois has lost back-to-back games at Michigan State and against Wisconsin. So it's just utter chaos, both on and off the court. We're going to get into it all in today's episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. Follow on Instagram, follow on YouTube, subscribe, all the good stuff. And with that, let's get into it. All right, let's first address what's going on in college basketball. Like I said off the top, I've been a little hesitant to talk about it, partly because the product on the court this year has been so fun to watch. I have really enjoyed this season of college basketball. I've told many people, and I probably talked about it on the podcast, how the mix of experience and professionalism, I guess, for lack of a better word, but you have teams that have stuck around because NIL can afford, has created an opportunity and an environment for these players to stick around. They can make some money versus having to go pro or go to Europe and play or what have you. So you have teams with some older guys sticking around. And then also you've mixed that with maybe one of the best freshman class ever, certainly one of the statistically best freshman classes ever, just in terms of their production. Many years ago, a lot of freshmen didn't get a lot of playing time. For instance, in Michael Jordan's freshman year, there's a whole list of amazing college players that were freshmen, but just didn't play a lot because that's the way things were back then. But long story short, this season has been super engaging. There is a long list of teams capable of winning the national title. You have some dominance. You have some outstanding individual performances. Braden Smith, Cam Boozer, AJ DeBonsa, Darren Peterson, Houston, UConn. Like, it's just endless, really. And so it's made for a great on-court experience for college basketball fans. The flip side of that is I've talked to a handful of people throughout this season who say, I don't really follow college. And part of the reason is I don't know anybody playing anymore because they change teams. I can't keep up with it every year. There's a whole roster turnover, and certainly that is an issue. So I want to talk about some of those issues today, talk about both from the college aspect and the NBA, some of the issues, but then also offer some ideas or solutions, or at least things to think about or, consider. And so let's start off the top. The number one thing that caught my eye a few months ago was Utah University and its athletics program partnering with a private equity firm called Otro Capital. That first raised alarms with me because I have been a part of companies that have been owned by private equity, and I'll be honest, the experience has not been great. Private equity's goal is to take an asset and flip it for a better return, right? Like it's meant to you know, sell it for more than they bought it for, right? And so what happens a lot of times in that scenario, not all the time, but in my experience and things I've seen and read, private equity basically comes in, strips away as much of any expense, any you know, costs, and they want to get it bare bones, and so the profit, it's still profitable. But what happens is you lose any expansion, research, you know, the growth engines for a lot of these companies um, go away. So they kind of hit this stagnation point where they're profitable, but they don't have many employees, and they're just, again, bare bones. Now, how does that relate to an athletics department? Well, with the Utah agreement specifically, um, all the supposed athletic decisions are still made by the university and by the administration, so the athletics director. The marketing, the ticketing, things like that are being handled more so by the investment firm. So, but what does that mean? That means they're essentially like betting on a profit at some point to sell to somebody, to sell to whoever. At any point, Utah can get out of this and buy back their stake. So they do have that flexibility. But really, this is about um, arming themselves with some capital, some money to compete in this day and age of college basketball. Now, it's not just Utah, but the Big Ten is also reportedly exploring some similar deals. You know, maybe I've seen numbers like $2 billion, so to help the Big Ten grow their brand and their revenues, and you know, it's again just this is all about money at this level. So um, you know, we'll see. Utah's basketball program hasn't seen any dramatic changes this year, and maybe it'll take another year. But their football teams had some success through the years. My hunch is that this is a way to combat the money flowing into BYU, which was notable when they got AJ Devonsa as a top recruit. You know, they had to pay top dollar to get him to come to BYU. Typically, your high recruits don't go to BYU; they go to the Dukes, the Kentuckys, the Kansas, North Carolinas, UCLA's, things like that. But BYU's got money and they threw it out, and AJ Devonsa is there. So, Utah is competing with BYU, both, from a fan perspective and all the other things, just being in proximity, and that's a rival for them. So, not surprising, I guess, to see them. We'll see if anybody else is doing this. I haven't heard anything recently, but private equity getting into college athletics takes on this whole other this is not education, this is not student athletes anymore, this is business, this is revenue, this is profits, and that's what they're focused on. So that's one thing going on in college sports that's, I guess, to me, concerning. Another one is the transfer portal causing a diminished fan loyalty. Totally get this one, right? Like every year you're looking at new players. I mean, Minnesota is a great example. Just turn over their roster every year, and you're starting fresh, and that's tough for coaching. It's tough for players. Basketball is a game of continuity. It's a game of familiarity with teammates. Knowing where your teammate's going to be on defense. Are they going to recover? Are they going to help you out? Do they know the rotation? Do you work together? And a lot of times that was built through 2 or 3 years of working in a system. And I've had guests on the podcast. Jared Berger at Wisconsin talked about this, like how different it would be for him now to be in this era of transfer portals, because he kind of sat for 2 years, but he became an all Big Ten player, working through that system, getting better, getting comfortable with the coaches, with the system, with the schemes and things like that. And so it's just it's something that's hurting college basketball fans for sure. It's great that the players have that freedom, that flexibility. They can choose their own adventure, essentially, right? But again, if this is a business and private equity is getting into this business, in business, there are typically contracts that are signed. And so I think there, at some level, that has to come into play. other issues that are coming up with the transfer portal is the death of the high school recruit, and this is something that I've heard multiple coaches brought up, including John Calipari, Tom Izzo. The idea that you go out and recruit a high school kid to get into your program so you can develop them, and then they become players, maybe year one, but maybe sophomore, junior, senior year. That's kind of gone away because what's happening now is coaches are coaching for their jobs. Their jobs are often to win. And to win, it's easier to win with 22-year-olds that have played 3 years of college basketball, even if it's at a lower level, if it's Iona or St. Thomas or Cal Poly or whatever it is. If they've been productive and they're 22, more often they are going to be better than an 18-year-old. And so they're betting on these older players in the transfer portal. They're getting European players who have played professional basketball for 2-3 years, starting when they were 16. And they're betting that that will get them better results in the win column. So what that means, fewer high school recruits going to high major programs. Now they go to low major programs or they go to D2 schools or JUCO or whatever. And then what do? They immediately move that into the next job, the next school, right? So you start at D2, Bennett Sturge, you go to Drake, mid-major. Now you're at Iowa, you're at a high major, right? And you've just continued, he's following his coach, but that is what's happening. And so you're poaching the players from the mid-major level to go to the high major level. And so those programs are suffering. There's G League players coming back to college now who maybe never played in the NBA and didn't sign an NBA contract, but they were in the draft. They went to the G League. Now they're in college. What all that means is there's just fewer opportunities for the high school players and for them, honestly, the mid-majors. You see schools like Miami this year, they're undefeated, but nobody's really talking a lot about them because they haven't played anybody. Why didn't they play anybody? Because nobody wanted to play them. The high major schools, the Big Tens, the SECs, Big 12s, those schools just play each other, right? Like there was more big games early in the year this year, more games against ranked opponents than there ever has been, which is great for our fans' perspective. It's great for it's fun. But who's losing out are the mid-majors. They're becoming feeder programs. They're becoming the AAA of college basketball, which, when you have 360 plus teams in college basketball and you're all playing for one title, that seems also bizarre. So, splitting that up somehow would be, I think, another solution, but that's for another day. I did want to talk about mid-majors again, because I love the mid-majors. It's what's made March Madness amazing for its entire existence, is the hope and the fun of a 15 beating a 2, a 16 beating a 1. Those are what we live for on that Thursday, that Friday of March Madness, right? That's what makes it great. It's George Mason getting to a Final Four with Jim Larinaga. Like those are the moments, right? So what happens with mid-majors? Why did they used to do that more often? Because they had continuity. They were the schools that had the 22-year-olds who had played together for 4 years. All the high major programs, the Dukes, Kentuckys, they had the one and dones. They had the younger rosters. They were the ones turning over because they were recruiting the best, brightest players that were young. Mid-majors like Davidson, Steph Curry stayed until his junior year. You had schools like that who had groups stuck together, and then they got their moment and they hit it. That's what was fun. So one of the things that I've seen proposed, I think it makes a lot of sense here if they can figure it out, they being people who make a lot of money to make these decisions, but is sort of like a compensation or like a mid-major, player compensation or tax. Essentially, that would be if a mid-major player goes to a high major, the high major pays a developmental tax. They do this in European soccer, and it's like, I think they call it a compensation fee, but it's essentially you develop this player, they became better, we want them, and we will pay you the compensation for developing them. And so what happens then is those mid-majors generate some revenue. Maybe they can keep their player longer, and the high major they then have to weigh the compensation versus the addition of that player. So It's just one thought around creating more equity in college basketball when it comes to funding, because teams like St. Thomas is an example, right? Kendall Blue leaves, he goes to Nebraska. North Dakota State, they had two players leave, they go somewhere else. I think one of them's at Illinois State. But they could get compensated for that development. They recruited those kids. They were the ones that got them to a level where they were wanted by high majors. Should there not be some sort of compensation for them for doing that work? So just something to think about. Who pays that? How much do they pay? Does it change any of the NIL issues when schools are paying other schools for the rights to a player, that kind of thing? It does become tricky, but again, there's other models, European models. In soccer, they do things like this. So it's not unheard of. It's totally doable if people really wanted to get it done. Now, onto the NBA. So the NBA has an issue just with sheer volume of games at this point. The stars are not playing all 82 anymore. Very rarely. There's so much load management happening in the NBA that star players aren't even going to be eligible for postseason awards, because I think you have to have played 65 games or something like that to be eligible for postseason awards, like MVP and Defensive Player of the Year and all that stuff. I mean, that's just crazy, right? Like, these players are willingly giving up awards that are help vote for Hall of Fame candidacy because they want to, rest. And if that's the problem, then you're playing too many games. Now, the owners obviously don't want to give up any TV money. They don't want it. These TV contracts are in the books right now because of the amount of games they play. And that's a huge part of it. So, teams are tanking openly. The Jazz, Brooklyn, there's Washington. There's teams that are basically out of it in February right now. And we won't see them put a quality product, and their fans won't see a quality product for months now. And so it's a problem. How the new aprons that are part of the CBA in the NBA, they make it harder to keep your rosters together. The salaries are crazy. So everybody's kind of chasing that money, which they have every right to do. But when you're paying big money for superstars and they're sitting out often, I even watching the Wolves, right? Like I think they had like a 5-game run where they played teams whose top 3 players didn't play in any of those games. And so then you become kind of like, well, what are we doing this for? Right. It makes the games really tough to watch because they're just not as meaningful in that way. So there's a couple things that I've been throwing out, and I think might solve some of these issues if they were to get adopted. And again, there's got to be people who are way more informed on this process than I am. But I've been thinking more about the European basketball and soccer models, right? So if you're the NBA, let's say you drop down to 60 or 70 games, whatever that number is. Obviously, there's a loss of revenue, right? The owners aren't going to love it. But you say that's the premier, that's the NBA, right? These are the top 20 teams in the world, essentially. We're going to have another tier below that, and we're going to have relegation. So if you finish in the bottom 2 of the NBA, you're going down to that next tier. Do you think that would help tanking? Teams don't want to. I mean, everybody watched Ted Lasso, right? Those players want to win because they don't want to get relegated. So the games become meaningful again. The players play because there's fewer of them. You can space them out. You're not playing 6 back-to-backs over a 10-day span or whatever they've been doing lately. Like it's insanity. So anyway, so that's one thing, right? You got your tier 1, you got your tier 2, call it the Champions League, Championship NBA League, whatever it is, current G League. And then you add another 3rd tier, which is basically your developmental league. It's I'm coming to the pros out of high school, and this is my developmental league. So you have 3 leagues, part of professional basketball. How the NBA can offset costs lost to their premier teams is that second tier will still be high level basketball. You're going to have good teams, good players. Maybe the best college players are up in that league. Guys who've been in the pro system for a couple years are moving up. And then you're going to have bottom teams like, let's say, the Utah Jazz right now. Like they might fall into that, right? So you get more streaming, you get more TV games with that group. The Champions League in Europe, by the way, is one of the most watched soccer leagues in the world. So it's not the top league, but it still has tremendous ratings. And I don't think that that would be any different here with basketball. Um, so that's one way to do it. The other thing I would love to see happen, and I don't really understand why it's okay in baseball that they do this, but in baseball, you can get drafted and then you can say, I'm going to go to college anyway. And when you go to college, you are staying for 3 years. There is no other option. You can either go pro right away and stick with that route, or if you choose college, you stay for 3 years. So why is that not an option for basketball? Is my question, because I would love to see that. That solves the issues of transferring every year. It solves the one and dones. It solves, it gives players that flexibility who want to go pro, like Cooper Flagg last year would have been a great example. He can go pro. The AJ DeBonsa, Darren Peterson, they can all be in that pro league. That would be totally fine with me, because college basketball fans want to see, I want to see a player stick around for 3 years and love the program and get a degree, go to school, whatever that is, right? Like get back to what college basketball used to be or should have been about. What's its intended purpose? So, you can choose out of high school, you get drafted by a club, right? So there's the Timberwolves, maybe they have a tier 2 club and a tier 3 club. You get drafted by the Timberwolves, you go through their system, just like you would in any other league in the world. And so that would help, I think, with that. You'd get college players to stick around. You have to still sign that contract. So when you say, all right, I'm going to go to this college, I'm signing a 3-year contract with this college, you can still get your NIL money. All of that still applies, but the contract is 3 years. Then you're free to do whatever you want after that. You can get drafted again. You can do what have you. So that's my plan. That would be my solution to a lot of this. Fewer NBA games, more tiers, more levels of professional basketball for those that want that route. And then college is a 3-year commitment minimum. You go, you choose to do that. You stick around, you stay with your team. That's your choice. And then go from there. But I think that would help solve a lot of the issues that we're seeing. Feel free to let me know what I missed on that. I'm sure there's things I definitely am forgetting about or don't understand about certain situations, but that's my solution. Let me know what you think. All right, now it's time for my weekly college basketball top 10 rankings. A lot has changed since last week. 7 of my top 10 last week lost. Some bitter rivals just got knocked off. Some lost on the road in the toughest of environments. But with that, let's talk about it. My number 1 team this week has changed. It is now the Michigan Wolverines. They have the 1 loss. They looked great going into Michigan State and winning that rivalry game. There's only 1 undefeated team left in the country, and that is the Miami of Ohio Redhawks. Not making my top 10 this week, but they are surviving week in and week out. So they might get to the NCAA tournament undefeated, which would be a wild story. Michigan Wolverines, though, they are my number 1 team this week. Number 2, I have the Houston Cougars jumping up. They have had some impressive victories. They have just the 2 losses on the season. They continue to get it done. Again, I've talked about it a lot. Kingston Flemings, Joseph Tugler, the big man in the middle for Houston, playing well. And then Chris Senack, another freshman for Kelvin Sampson's team, is coming on. So Houston, I'm telling you, they look phenomenal, and they are primed and ready to make another deep March run. Number 3 this week, I dropped Arizona from the top spot down to number 3 after they lost at Fog Allen Fieldhouse at Kansas. Epic game, just outstanding. Arizona was not as sharp as they typically are. We'll chalk that up to maybe a couple freshman starters playing in a tough environment, but they just didn't get great shots down the stretch. Kansas's defense was phenomenal. Flory Badunga was awesome. Melvin Council was awesome. They did not have Darren Peterson. The fact that they didn't have DP against that Arizona team and still won is very impressive. I continue to say, if Darren Peterson plays 30 minutes for Kansas, they are going to be a Final Four team. Even without him, though, they are capable, and they just knocked off Arizona. So Arizona falls a couple spots. They're down to number 3 this week. Number 4, I have the Duke Blue Devils. They drop a spot after losing at North Carolina. I think now is as good a time as any for me to go on my Duke rant. Over the last 2 years, Duke has 6 losses. So I'm not going to feel like this is too nitpicky. That's a pretty phenomenal record for John Shire. However, I believe it's 5 of those 6 games they led by at least 8 points in the second half. We've had collapses against Kentucky. We had a collapse in the Final Four last year against Houston. They collapsed against Texas Tech with like a 17 or 18 point lead. They collapsed with a double-digit lead at Carolina last weekend. John Shire and Duke needs to figure out better execution late in games. I know you had Cooper Flagg, and I know you have Cam Boozer this year, and you want to ISO them. There are other players in those programs capable of making shots in big moments. They need more fluidity. They need more movement. They need more actions to keep the defense honest in those moments. Cam Boozer had a great look at the end of that game to take the lead. He missed it. Carolina comes down, hits the 3. Seth Trimble, huge in that game. But I do think Duke has work to do when it comes to end game situational basketball to win these games. They should not be blowing double-digit leads to these teams. And, that was Duke's toughest game left on the schedule. So we'll see how they finish out the year. They're currently number 4 in my rankings. Number 5, UConn. They go down at St. John's last Friday. And again, another great game at Madison Square Garden. Patino versus Hurley. When you play rivalry games like Duke did, like UConn did against St. John's, and you lose on the road, those aren't terrible losses. I still feel good about UConn. I think they're a great team. They were bound to lose a Big East game at some point. This was probably the most likely candidate, but I'm confident that they will rebound and they will be in the mix at the end of the year. Number 7, talked about them earlier, Kansas Jayhawks. I am moving them up. I know they have the 5 losses, but they've been on a roll since they beat Iowa State in early January. They haven't lost since January 10th. They've beaten Iowa State, BYU, Texas Tech, and Arizona out of that stretch. Those are 4 of the top 20 to 25 teams in the country. And Kansas is starting to look like Kansas again. Bryson Tiller has been great lately. I talked about Melvin Council. They got White. They got Badunga is a beast down low. Got away with a little bit of a travel in that Arizona game, which is a big basket. But Kansas, I think if they're putting it together, if they're healthy and they have Darren Peterson, they are a top 10 team. Another team moving up because of all of these losses is Purdue. I think Purdue had their stretch. They lost 3 in a row a few weeks back, but I think they're getting back to form. They looked really good for the majority of that game against Nebraska last night. They lost the lead. They kind of fell apart for about 2 minutes, let Nebraska tie it, but they put it together in overtime. That first half looked like the Purdue team we all expected them to be throughout the year. When Cox is making shots, Braden Smith is facilitating incredibly well, and Oscar Clough is contributing. Kaufman Wren had like 19 rebounds last night. They are really good. That's the team I expected to see. So I put them in the top 10 at number 8. Number 9, I dropped Iowa State. They lose last night to TCU. Probably not a game they should be losing at this point. They are too good. I know TCU's had some good wins this year. Jamie Dixon does a great job, and they are a tough out, no doubt, and that's a road game in the Big 12. But I do think Iowa State is capable. That's why I have them at 9. Not quite sure they're in that top group with the Michigan, Houston, Arizona, Duke, probably UConn, but they are definitely that next tier. They come in at number 9 for me this week. And then number 10, I am bringing back, again, Florida. Florida is playing really good basketball. Florida has lost 2 games in the year 2026. They lost to Missouri on January 3rd, and they lost at Auburn a couple weeks ago. Otherwise, they have been playing really good. They beat league-leading Texas A&M the other night. So they are starting to round back into form again. They lost all their guards from last year's championship team. Took them a while to kind of figure it out. But you're starting to see Boogie Flan play a little bit better. Xavier Lee's making shots, kind of being more of who he needs to be for them. And then their front court, again, is just phenomenal. So they are going to win the rebounding battle. They're usually going to win points in the paint. And those are just huge statistics in college basketball. So I got Florida at number 10. Nebraska falls out. They've lost a few in a row here as of late. So, not terrible losses. It's just, when you get home games and you're losing to Illinois and you lose to Purdue, maybe those are teams that you're just not quite there yet. It seems to me that people have kind of figured out Nebraska's defense a little bit. They do a great job of rotating, but I think there's some gaps that people are identifying with cuts to the middle of the paint, getting to the nail. So Nebraska has struggled a little bit with some of these better teams the last few weeks. The other team that fell out was Illinois. Now, Illinois is mostly an injury issue. They're without Kylan Boswell. They lose last night to Wisconsin, also without Andrei Stojakovic. So their starting backcourt was not playing. Those are two huge losses. They just weren't quick enough last night. You saw Nick Boyd, John Blackwell kind of tear them apart at the end in their big comeback. They were getting to the paint. They were either finishing or they were driving, kicking for open threes, and Austin Rapp was knocking them down. So, I'm not terribly worried about Illinois if they get healthy. If they're not healthy, if this is who they are, then they're going to struggle with guards. But Wisconsin is another team that if they get hot here for a week or two, they'll be starting to crack that top 10. Not a surprise. Greg Gard always gets his team. And I said at the beginning of the year, Wisconsin's backcourt was going to be as good as anybody in the Big Ten, maybe the country. And you're seeing it now with Nick Boyd, John Blackwell, just taking control when they need to. Look out for the Badgers. That was a long ramble. Those are top 10 plus a few other teams we wanted to talk about, but that's for the week, February 11th, 2026. All right, that's the show for today. We covered a lot of ground. We talked about off the court and on the court issues with the college product and the NBA product. Hope you enjoyed that segment. And then, of course, I did the college basketball top 10 rankings that I do every Wednesday. Would love to hear your thoughts on that. See what I got wrong. See if you think I should have somebody else in the mix there. And I'm sure that evoke a lot of opinions about my college basketball rankings. Follow on Instagram, leave a comment, follow on Facebook, Splash City Basketball Podcast. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel where I'll put out different videos throughout the week, including my teams of the week, usually on Sundays. Love to see you there as well. But in the meantime, I appreciate you listening. Take care. Have a great week. This has been the Splash City Basketball Podcast.